It's Sunday morning, August 17th, 1969, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast is moving slowly. The temperature is already 84 degrees in Pass Christian, and the air smells of saltwater, magnolia, and the charcoal smoke drifting from 100 backyards, getting ready for an early Sunday cookout. The beach is full of children. A teenage girl in a yellow swimsuit walks barefoot down Scenic Drive, sand between her toes. Outside Trinity Episcopal Church on East Scenic Drive.
That was a lovely service, Father.
Yes, truly inspiring. We'll see you at the potluck.
Goodbye now.
Families are filing out of the 9 a.m. service, prayer books in hand, talking about the heat. Down the road in Bay St. Louis, the smell of frying shrimp and chicory coffee drifts out of a diner on Main Street. On the 3rd floor of the Richelieu Manor Apartments, a modern 3-story brick complex built right on the beach. A young couple is unpacking a cooler of beer. They've heard the radio. There's a hurricane in the Gulf. There's been a voluntary evacuation order. They don't plan to leave. The building survived Hurricane Betsy 4 years ago. They figured they'll ride this one out. This is ordinary life. Unremarkable. Forgettable. By 11:30 tonight, that apartment building won't exist. That couple will be in the water, fighting for their lives. And by Wednesday morning, 259 people across 2 states will be dead. And the Mississippi coast they grew up on will be erased from the map. To understand what Camille did, you first need to understand where it landed. Picture the Mississippi Gulf Coast. A long, flat, 26-mile ribbon of beach towns. Bay St. Louis, Pass Christian, Long Beach, Gulfport, Biloxi, Ocean Springs. Strung along US Highway 90 like beads on a string. Imagine a coastline, almost flush with sea level. The highest natural point in Pass Christian is barely 20 feet. Trinity Church and the Richelieu Manor sit on a strip of land less than 10 feet above the high tide line. Now picture the geography that makes this place so beautiful and so deadly. The Gulf of Mexico's continental shelf here is shallow and wide. That shallow water amplifies storm surge. When a hurricane drives the sea ahead of it, the water has nowhere to go but up. And the coastline curves slightly inward, a soft, gentle bay shape that funnels water toward the centre, exactly where Pass Christian sits. There are no barrier islands here strong enough to absorb a Category 5. Cat Island, Ship Island, Horn Island, they are slivers of sand. Storm surge passes over them, as if they weren't there. Beautiful, yes. But it also meant that when the right kind of storm arrived, there was nowhere for the water to go, except over the houses, over the highway, over the people. And by Sunday afternoon, the right kind of storm was coming. Hurricane Camille was born from a tropical wave that left the African coast on August 5th, 1969. For 10 days she crawled westward across the Atlantic. Unimpressive, disorganized, barely a tropical depression. On August 14th, she crossed western Cuba as a moderate hurricane. Then she emerged over the open Gulf of Mexico, and something happened. Sea surface temperatures in the Gulf that August were extraordinary, over 86 degrees, with deep warm water beneath. Camille hit that fuel like a match hitting kerosene. In less than 36 hours, she went from a Category 2 to one of the most intense Atlantic hurricanes ever measured. By Sunday morning, August 17th, when the people of Pass Christian were heading to church, Camille's central pressure had collapsed to 905 millibars. Her sustained winds were estimated at 175 miles per hour, with gusts above 200. She was a Category 5. She was, at that moment, the second most intense hurricane ever to threaten the United States mainland. To understand what 905 millibars means, picture the air pressure inside a hurricane as a giant vacuum. The lower the pressure, the harder the wind has to scream toward the centre to fill the void. At 905 millibars, the air doesn't blow. It explodes inward at the speed of a freight train. She was small too, only about 70 miles wide. That made her even worse. All of her energy was concentrated in a tight, dense core. A small Category 5 is a knife. A large Category 5 is a club. Camille was a knife, and she was aimed straight at Pass Christian. There is no robber baron in this story, no corporation that built a faulty dam. The villain in Camille is something subtler and more universal: human disbelief. The National Hurricane Center, in 1969, was using technology that today seems almost prehistoric. There were only 2 weather satellites covering the Atlantic basin. the first reconnaissance aircraft to fly into Camille's eye on August 16th, reported a pressure of 908 millibars and was nearly torn apart in the eye wall. The hurricane hunters knew. The forecasters knew. By Sunday morning, Dr. Robert Simpson, director of the Hurricane Center, was telling reporters, "This is the strongest storm in living memory, and anyone in its path needs to leave." Mississippi Civil Defense got on the radio. So did Governor John Bell Williams. Evacuation orders went out. Buses ran north into Hattiesburg. Police cruisers rolled through the beach communities with loudspeakers. And in Harrison County, Civil Defense Director Wade Geis, a thick-shouldered man whose voice would become legend on the Mississippi coast over the next 4 decades, picked up the radio microphone and delivered what would become the most quoted warning in American hurricane history. "If you choose to stay," he said, "please write your name and your social security number on your arm in indelible ink. We will need it to identify your body on Tuesday. Leave. Leave now." But 4 years earlier, in 1965, Hurricane Betsy had passed through the same coast. People had boarded up, ridden it out, and survived. They had a theory. The shallow Gulf would weaken any major storm. The coast had survived 100 years of hurricanes. They had survived Betsy. They would survive this. That assumption, that the past predicts the future, would prove fatal. At the Richelieu Manor Apartments in Pass Christian, the building manager walked door to door Sunday afternoon, telling residents to leave. He was begged by some accounts by individual tenants who were already drinking and laughing about the storm. The legend that emerged afterward, the hurricane party, became a national myth. The truth was less Hollywood and more tragic. Most of the residents who stayed weren't partying. They were tired, broke, scared of looters. Sure, they had time. Sure, the building was strong. They were ordinary people making ordinary decisions, the way ordinary people do, against a threat they had no historical reference for. There had never been a Category 5 in their memory. There had never been one in their grandfather's memory either. They were warned. They believed they had time. They were warned again. They locked their doors and watched the news. By 6 p.m, most of the Gulf Coast had already evacuated, but thousands hadn't. And every minute that passed, the Gulf came closer. By 4 p.m. on Sunday, the wind in Pass Christian was already 50 miles per hour. By 6 p.m, the rain was horizontal. By 8 p.m, the first telephone poles began snapping along Highway 90. The Bay Street Louis Bridge was already underwater. Power flickered, failed, came back, failed for good. At 9 p.m, the eye of Hurricane Camille was 30 miles offshore. Coast Guard observers in Mobile reported winds of 100 miles per hour and rising. At a civil defense post in Bay St. Louis, a deputy stared at his anemometer as it climbed past 120 miles per hour and then disintegrated. The instrument that was supposed to measure wind was ripped off the building. Across the coast, anemometer after anemometer was destroyed. We will never know exactly how fast the wind blew at landfall. The best modern reconstructions place it at sustained 175 miles per hour, with gusts of 220 miles per hour or higher. At 10:30 p.m, the storm surge began to arrive, not as a wave, as a wall. A solid, vertical, rising mass of black water moving inland at the speed of a slow car. At 11:30 p.m, the eye of Camille made landfall directly over Pass Christian. A barometer at a private home there recorded 26.84 inches of mercury, 909 millibars. It was the second lowest pressure ever recorded at landfall in the United States. The wind dropped to nothing. The air smelled of salt and ozone. Stars were briefly visible overhead. The point of no return had passed. The thousands of people still in Pass Christian, Bay St. Louis, Long Beach, Gulfport, Biloxi, and the surrounding communities had no exit, no power, no phones, no boats, no high ground. The Gulf was already waist deep in their living rooms, and the back wall of the eye was still coming. Camille didn't roll ashore. She detonated. The peak storm surge at Pass Christian reached 24.6 feet, the highest ever recorded in the United States at that point in Inuit history. 24 feet of seawater, salt heavy and full of debris, moved inland at 30 miles an hour, a moving wall of Black Sea. Pass Christian. The entire beachfront was scoured to the foundations. Houses that had stood since the 1840s. Cypress homes built to last centuries were not blown down. They were lifted off their pilings, carried 2 blocks inland, and disintegrated. Trinity Episcopal Church was reduced to a single archway. The corner of Henderson Avenue and Beach Boulevard, where families had been laughing 12 hours earlier, was suddenly a featureless plain of mud and timber. Bay Street Louis, the bridge to Pass Christian, gone, every span. The waterfront commercial district along Beach Boulevard and Main Street, gone. St. Stanislaus College, founded in 1854, was gutted to the 2nd floor. Long Beach, 1,200 homes destroyed in a single night. 90% of the town's structures were unusable. Whole neighbourhoods of working-class shrimper families simply ceased to exist. Gulfport, the harbour, the Coast Guard station, the entire port were submerged. Massive freighters moored in the Gulf were ripped from anchor and slammed inland. 2 of them came to rest on Highway 90, blocks from the water. Out on the barrier islands themselves, something happened that did not yet have a name. The full force of the surge hit Ship Island, a long, low strip of barrier sand 12 miles offshore, and tore it in half. By Monday morning, where there had been 1 ship island, there were 2. The new gap, 400 yards of open water, would be christened Camille Cut. It exists today. It is still widening. And then the Richelieu Manor. Mary Ann Gerlach was 32 years old. She lived on the 2nd floor of the Richelieu with her husband, a merchant marine. They had decided to stay. By 10 p.m. Sunday, the water was up to the 2nd floor. Mary Ann was clinging to a mattress with 5 neighbours. She watched the building shake, then heard a sound she could not describe. A deep, heavy crack, like a tree splitting at the trunk. The Richelieu Manor, 3 stories of reinforced brick, built in 1958 as one of the most modern buildings on the Mississippi coast, broke apart in the storm surge. Mary Ann was sucked through a window. She rode debris for hours alone in the dark, the wind so loud she could not hear her own screaming. She washed up alive 5 miles inland in a tree. She was the only person from her unit who survived. Of the roughly 24 residents who stayed in the Richelieu that night, only 8 lived. The hurricane party was never a party. It was a quiet, frightened decision by ordinary people to stay home. A decision they did not live to regret. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was about to get worse. 2 days later, on the night of August 19th, the remnant of Hurricane Camille, now technically a tropical depression, drifted across the Appalachian foothills of central Virginia. The storm was supposed to be dead. It was barely on the weather map. Then, between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., something almost unprecedented happened. The dying storm collided with a stationary cold front directly over Nelson County, Virginia. In 5 hours, 27 inches of rain fell on the steep, narrow hollows of the Blue Ridge. It was as if a lake had emptied from the sky. The mountainsides, saturated, root shallow, soaked all summer, let go. Massive landslides peeled entire hillsides into the creek valleys below. In Davis Creek, a small farming community where 52 people lived, walls of mud and timber and water 20 feet high tore through homes at 4 a.m. while the residents slept. By dawn on August 20th, Nelson County had lost 113 people. Davis Creek itself lost 35 of its 52 residents in a single night, including 17 members of the Huffman family alone, 3 generations swept away in their night clothes. Camille, 1,000 miles from her birth, killed almost as many people in the mountains of Virginia as she did at the Mississippi coast. In the small communities of Massey's Mill and Lovingston, the Tye River jumped its banks and rose 22 feet in 3 hours. Bridges that had stood since the 1900s disappeared in seconds. Entire families asleep on the 2nd floor of their homes woke to find the 1st floor gone and the road outside replaced by a river of mud, carrying refrigerators, tractors, and the bodies of their neighbours. The Blue Ridge had never seen anything like it. To this day, it still hasn't. The final death toll was 259, 143 along the Mississippi and Louisiana Gulf Coast, 113 in Virginia. The remainder along Camille's path inland, more than 5,600 injured, approximately 8,931 homes destroyed, and another 14,000 damaged on the Mississippi coast alone. Among the dead, an estimated 41 children under the age of 12 across the 2 states. 17 members of one Virginia family, the Huffmans of Davis Creek, the 15 to 17 residents of the Richelieu Manor who never made it out, the unnamed dead in Nelson County, Virginia, whose bodies were found weeks and months later, washed downstream into the James River. Some never identified at all. To this day, more than 20 people in Nelson County are listed as missing, never found. They are not statistics. They are names that no one ever got to inscribe on a headstone. The Red Cross set up shelters in Hattiesburg, Jackson, and across the South. President Richard Nixon flew in for an aerial tour and declared Mississippi a federal disaster area. The Mississippi National Guard, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers. For the first time since World War II, a coastal-scale disaster response was mounted in days, not weeks. Volunteers from across the country drove south with chainsaws and water and food. Catholic nuns set up field kitchens. The University of Southern Mississippi turned its dorms into shelters. But survivors of the Mississippi coast wanted to know one thing. How could a building like the Richelieu, designed and built by professionals, advertised as hurricane-proof, break apart? How could so much of a coastline that had been thoroughly mapped and surveyed be wiped from the planet in a single night? The answer was simple and terrible. Nothing built before 1969 on the Mississippi coast had ever been engineered for a Category 5 storm. The 24-foot surge had not been believed possible. The 175-mile-per-hour wind had not been believed possible. Nobody alive had ever designed for what Camille did, because nobody had ever measured what Camille did. There were no lawsuits in the conventional sense. Camille was an act of nature, and the court said so. There was no Andrew Carnegie at the top of this story, no club of millionaires who removed safety pipes. The villains were not individuals. They were assumptions. The assumption that the past predicts the future. The assumption that buildings designed for Category 3 winds would survive a Category 5. The assumption that a 24-foot storm surge could not happen because it had never happened in living memory. But what Camille did do was rip those assumptions apart. In the years that followed, every aspect of American hurricane preparedness was rebuilt. The Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, the now familiar Category 1 through Category 5 system, was developed in 1971 in direct response to Camille, so that the public would have a clearer language for what a Category 5 actually meant. The SLOSH model, the computer simulation that estimates storm surge, was developed in the years after, fed by the data Camille generated. Mississippi rewrote its coastal building codes. The Stennis Space Center Weather Research Program expanded. Reconnaissance flights were upgraded, and every coastal community in America, with the political will to do so quietly, raised its evacuation thresholds. After Camille, voluntary evacuation in front of a major hurricane was understood to mean leave or expect to die. If you drive Highway 90 today through the Pass Christian, you will not find the Cypress mansions of 1969. You will not find the Richelieu Manor Apartments, only an empty foundation slab visible at low tide, slowly disappearing into the sand. The town has rebuilt twice, once after Camille, once after Katrina in 2005. The newer homes are on stilts, built for the storm everyone now knows is coming sooner or later. In Nelson County, Virginia, on a quiet road off Highway 29, there is a small monument with a list of 113 names. Some have dates of birth, some say only unknown. Davis Creek itself is no longer a community. The survivors moved away, and the woods grew back over what used to be houses. There is a single wooden sign at the side of the road that reads, Davis Creek. Population was 52. Camille was not just a hurricane. Nature provided the wind, the surge, and the rain. But human disbelief, the deep, almost biological refusal to imagine a storm worse than the one we already remember, provided the casualty list. 259 dead, 41 children, more than 20 still missing. 0 people who, in 1969, believed it could really happen. Remember Pass Christian. Remember Davis Creek. The deadliest storms are the ones we cannot imagine until they take everything we have